Hello. Quick announcement here while I get ready. On the slide. On the slide. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, okay. Good morning. Welcome to part 2. Part 2 of microeconomics, that is. So, anybody who has living and breathing has heard that there's been a worldwide stock market crash. Maybe that's a little strong to use, but late Monday evening, our time, the Shanghai stock market dropped 9%, which is a significant drop by anybody's standards. And then it had a ripple effect around the globe. So while we were all watching the Academy Awards, other people were contemplating jumping out of windows. It's bounced back, but I heard today that the Shanghai market has dropped again, about 3%, and the New York Stock Exchange Dow Index has dropped 200, which is a pretty significant drop, but not a crash. Why do I bring this bad news to you? Not that you would care, but it affects job markets and it affects student loans should be cheaper. Everybody's running out buying bonds, selling their stock, driving down the price of debt. So if you're thinking about taking out another student loan, this is a good time to do it. The reason why is because we're going to talk about competitive markets and competitive equilibrium in the next 4 or 5 weeks in part 2 of this course. And what better example of a competitive market than the stock exchange? Right? Now, I had hoped to get us a webcam from the Shanghai, the Florida Shanghai Stock Exchange. I couldn't find that. I couldn't find one for Wall Street either, that is for the New York Stock Exchange. But I did find one for the Hollywood Stock Exchange. For those of you who haven't heard of this is a stock exchange which you can play. They start you out with $2 million worth to spend in funny money. I recommend doing it. I got up and got an account here. What you can do is you can take shares in an actor, in a movie, and through your bets, the price is set. Right? Basically, supply and demand determining them. So right here, there's star bonds and movie stocks, and Angelina Jolie apparently is the big mover of the day, up $1.26 in Hollywood dollars. Terminator 4, which I guess is not out, right? So this is like kind of futures markets and bets in terms of how well they'll do in the box office and on DVD and so forth. Terminator 2 is leading with The Hobbit close behind. Wild Hogs is slipping pretty drastically. Anyways, it's kind of fun. You should try it. There's actually some economics behind this. It's more than just fun play like an online Monopoly, right? I mean, the money is like Monopoly money, but what you are effectively doing is bringing to bear your expectations from what you hear from friends and family, what you read in People or whatever, in terms of the direction up or down and the fortunes of these movies and actors. Okay? And the market mechanism is a great aggregator of that information. Okay? And so what we're going to look at now is more mundane examples of markets, but in a sense it's very similar. Okay? Now I apologize that these were just put up. These slides were just put up. My Wi-Fi home network has gone down. Went down, and I don't know why, and I haven't been able to get it up. So I wasn't able to post it on BSpace until I got in this morning, but it's now up on BSpace. All right, so we're going to talk about competitive market equilibrium. Then we're going to do a little loop back to something we've talked about before, and that is before the midterm. That was short run and long run. Only this is a little bit different, and I apologize in that we use short run and long run for different things. And here's the second example of that distinction. Remember, we use short run and long run with respect to a firm's supply decision and ask the question whether or not some factors of production were fixed or whether they're all variable. If some were fixed, we said, oh, the firm is in the short run. If it can vary everything, then it's in the long run. Well, we're going to use it differently now when we speak about the market supply. Short run is going to be referring to the number of firms in the market, whether that is fixed. The long run is going to allow entry and exit, so now the number of firms is going to be variable. Okay? So short run and long run used differently if it's with respect to firm supply than if it's with respect to market supply. So we're going to talk. This is going to be somewhat review, short run. Then in the long run, we're going to look at this entry and exit decision, which is sort of a vibrant dynamic of these markets. One of the things we're going to mention is how we can get increasing and decreasing cost industries, and this is not just in terms of the increasing or decreasing average cost that we saw when we were looking at a single firm. And remember, that was caused by returns to scale, primarily. Okay? Increasing returns to scale drove your unit costs down as a firm. Decreasing returns to scale forced them to go up. This, again, is speaking about the whole market supply curve, not an individual firm. So it's a little bit different. And then finally, we're going to talk about auctions, which are interesting and increasingly a way of doing what a competitive market does. Okay? So here is the standard competitive market. Usually we have a picture of the New York Stock Exchange. This is the Shanghai floor of the Shanghai Stock Exchange, since that seems to be where the world's eyes are on right now. But you know, as we're going to see in a minute, that I want you to break out of this kind of you know, kind of Time magazine view of markets as, well, that's what happens on the stock exchange. But look more broadly at what we're trying to do. And what we're trying to do in what happens as a result of this is you determine value. It's a classic question that has been around as long as economics has been around. In fact, I think before that, when philosophers like Aristotle were trying to understand what the attach of value to something, they weren't expressing that in terms of something that we would think of as in terms of modern economics, but they know that things like market structure, monopoly, would have an effect on the value that it's attached, the market value or the material value attached to some good. And it was Aristotle, after all, who coined the term monopoly. Goes back to the Greek. Right? Anyways, so we're very much interested in the price setting. How is the price set? And then the volume of transactions. When you hear a report, you go and flip on CNBC or what have you, you're going to hear today, well, what happened to the prices? And then in their second breath, they'll say what the volume was. Right? Dow Jones Industrial Average was down 200 points, and there was 32 billion shares traded hands. Okay, so price and volume, price and quantity, right? Okay. So what we want to do is this is a good way of getting at it. It's not the only way, and we're going to see when we turn to auctions an alternative way of answering these questions. What was transacted, and what was the terms of trade? All right. What do we mean by equilibrium? Now, this is kind of repetitious because we've talked about it before, but I just remind you that there's the participants in this market. All those folks that are on that floor here are in equilibrium when they have no desire to change. Right? Well, obviously, if you look at these. If I had a webcam on the floor of one of these exchanges, you see people shouting and making trades and arguing. So they're clearly not stable in the sense of well, they're mentally stable, or maybe not, but they're trying to do something to make themselves better off. In our world, we want that to come down to consumers and producers, and we want them to be in a state in which they're optimizing. Consumers are maximizing their utility subject to their income. Firms are maximizing profit given factor prices and their technology. Right? And that the market clears when they're doing that. So there's no surplus, no shortage building up. Right? And these are basically the three conditions that are going to pin down our competitive equilibrium. So how do we get there, though? That's a little bit trickier problem. If somehow magically somebody with great insight picked a price for each commodity and everybody looked at it and said, yeah, that's the right price, and I'm going to make my supply and demand decisions based on that price, and lo and behold, the market clears. Right? But you got to get there, and all that haggling that goes on the floor of these exchanges is a kind of way of getting to it, is a way of getting to the equilibrium. So too is our auctions. Here's one view that goes back to Leon Walras, a French economist who imagined that there was an auctioneer. It's not like the auctioneer you think of as Sotheby's or Christie's, up there with a Picasso and soliciting bids for to buy. It's a bit different. First of all, it's more fictitious. That we imagine that, say I'm the Walrasian auctioneer, I call out a price. So I call out a price for used copies of Basenko and Brodigan's textbook, second edition. Are we on the second edition or the first? Second, I think. Yeah, second edition. Okay, in good condition. Right? I call this out, and so many say, I'll sell at that price, and several others say, okay, I'll snap it up at that price. All right. So what I'm doing is through posting that price, I'm eliciting your supply decisions, and I'm eliciting your demand conditions. Now, if magically they equal one another, we're done. Say, okay, that's the price. Everybody who's supplying, dump them up here. Then everyone else who has wanted to buy one, you come up, pick them up, and lo and behold, everyone is picked up, and everybody's happy. Okay? But it's not going to generally happen. So how do we get there? Well, Walras said what we're going to do is we're going to have a price adjustment mechanism where if we have excess demand, then the price is simply too low. A lot of demand, too few people want to supply at that price. Right? If I said, okay, Basenko and Brodigan for $2 a piece, right? Some of you who already even have your textbook say, hey, I buy that, I can sell it back to the bookstore at the end of the term, and I get $30 for it. I don't know what you get for it, but you get something. And the rest of you say, well, I can use it as a doorstop. In the meantime, for $2, forget it. All right. So you got excess demand. So Walras says, okay, raise price in that case to try to close the gap. Similarly, if the price starts out too high, $200 a copy, lots of you would sell, and we need to drop the price. Okay? And how do we adjust it? Well, depending on the gap between demand and supply will determine the speed with which we adjust. The speed being the difference in price. So what I've done is I've said time t, we check, compare supply and demand. If demand exceeds supply, then we adjust price where the new price at t plus 1 is greater than the old price at t, because it told us that it was too low. Right? And hopefully, if things work out, following this rule, we'll get to an equilibrium. So price will converge down to some price, P star, and it's going to equal supply. Supply will equal demand. And this is a picture I just took from a first lecture, actually, which had this same idea without as much detail. That is to say, if we start off with a price too high, let me start with this one. Here was the low price. Demand is quite high. Supply is quite low, causing excess demand. Walras said, well, there's going to be forces. Not going to tell us what exactly the nuts and bolts of those forces, but there's forces that are going to drive that up. What would they be? Somebody would say, somebody would want the book at $2, and there's not enough books to be had at that price. So somebody said, well, look, I'm going to get skunked here. I'm not going to get a book. I'll say, hey, I'll double your price. I'll give you $4 for that book. All right? And then the seller says, well, all right. Hey, I just doubled what I otherwise was going to sell it for. And this process would be how the price would get driven up. Okay? And then just the flip side is when you have excess demand. Now, hopefully, we have downward sloping demand and upward sloping supply, which is we've argued that usually happens. It doesn't always happen. It depends on some of the effects underlying the supply and demand curves. But if that's the case, they cross once. And then if you use this kind of rule for adjusting price, you should drive to that single intersection point, that single price. Now, if you've been watching the stock market, the world stock markets, they're just gyrating. You know, it's kind of disconnected from reality. I mean, there's a lot of things that go behind it. The Chinese economy just turned in over 10% growth rate. It's unbelievable. People have limited ways to invest money, so there's a huge amount of personal savings that's put into stocks. People are much jumpier than institutions, pension funds and mutual funds and so forth. So it's not too terribly surprising. And so expectations are ruling the day here. I mean, compare that to, we just had it was been really cold here, but it's also been freezing in Florida. Well, when it freezes in Florida, what happens? That is, when it freezes in Florida in the middle of winter, besides hurting the tourist trade. Orange juice, yeah, what you drank this morning, many of you drank this morning before coming here, it hurts the citrus crop, right? Now there's something very real. There's a piece of news that has a significant, a tangible effect on this market through the supply curve. Presumably it has no effect on the demand side, but all of a sudden there's a lot of frozen oranges on the trees that are there before you can put them in a frozen can. And I don't know what happens, but it's not as good. The juice isn't good. It gets destroyed. So all of a sudden we got less supply. So we pull back this supply curve, but it's as a result of weather, right? And now every time that someone trades in futures on orange juice futures, and you can buy orange juice futures if you want, they're looking towards what might the weather be. And they actually, you know, look at the Farmer's Almanac because it's a great predictor of weather trends. And that gets fed into their holdings of orange juice futures. So expectations go into it, but it's expectations about, you know, Mother Nature. Right? What's going on in Shanghai right now is more like what Keynes had said about stock markets. It's a beauty contest, and you're a judge. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to judge something in terms of what you think everybody else will think is beautiful. So, because you don't actually consume the stock, you don't even get a stock certificate these days to look at and hang on your wall. Right? You don't consume it. Right? The only value of it is whether it'll appreciate or not. Right? So you're trying to guess what other people think about it. Okay, so let's talk about timing a little bit. I've already mentioned that in the case of firm supply, we've already talked about short run and long run. In the short run, we usually think that something like capital is fixed because there's not enough time to adjust it, and therefore you have less in the way of production options to respond to a price change. This is all with regard to a price change, because that's what we're interested in. We're determining price. We're interested in determining the location, shape, and elasticity of that supply curve, right, which is made up of a number of firm supply curves. And then in the long run, you can adjust everything except for the technology, presumably. And as a result, it's more elastic, more responsive to price. Right? Here, when we talk about market supply, we're going to reuse these terms, but as I apologized earlier, for a different way. And what's being fixed here is not a factor, but the number of firms. So you can think of now the short run is a time period in which a firm is unable to do two things. One, get in the business, from scratch, or 2, leave the business, having been established in that business earlier. But in the longer run, again, a length of time long enough, firms can enter the business and exit the business. Now, how long is that? I don't know. But one of the things that what has been seems to have been happening in the internet businesses lately is the entry time is much quicker, even quicker than during the dot-com boom. It's not as easy to get financing for it, but in terms of getting the servers together, getting office space, getting people who know how to write SQL or Java, to get the piece parts to fit together and get this up and going is remarkably quick. Right? We're talking about weeks. Compare that to if you're going to produce steel. It's years, many years. Okay, so this in some sense is a review. So remember, market supply is the horizontal sum of all these different firms, whether that is short run or long run. In terms of the firms, we mean short run in terms of the number of firms when we talk about market supply. Okay? So then equilibrium is just where the supply and demand curves cross when we've carefully chosen the short run market supply curve. Short run being here the number of firms fixed. So you've seen this picture before. So if we have identical firms, on the left panel is just sort of a representative firm here. That's their supply curve. We're assuming that their shutdown point here is the shutdown price is the minimum average variable cost. So apparently, if they have any fixed cost, it's sunk, at least in this time frame. Right? So this the firm is a short-run firm supply curve. Right? We're interested, though, in the market supply curve. We ask the question, well, what is that if we have 5 carbon copies of this? I don't know, can you even say carbon copies anymore? Can't say Xerox copies because they've no longer a monopoly. Identical copies of that firm, and just as we saw, had pushed out the supply, the market supply, to reflect that each one will deliver. There'll be 5 of them delivering the same amount to the market. But notice that's upward sloping, and if I had a 6th firm, there'd be another supply curve. It would push out. It would be flatter, all right? And a 7th even more, and keep on going. But I didn't because I'm in the short run here. There's a fixed number of firms. Right? In a minute, when we look at the long run, we're going to see how that long run market supply curve will flatten out as firms come and go. All right, this is just taking those words and putting it into symbols. Remember, each one of these firms here are profit maximizers, and there's 2 conditions for that. Price equal marginal cost, so they're maximizing their profit, but they also got to at least break even. That's why the firm supply curve starts at the bottom of its average variable cost curve. Right? To go below that would lose money. Right? So that's each individual firm. Then we've got n identical ones. In the picture, there were 5. Right? Giving us our supply curve. Then we just match it up with our demand curve and have market clearing. So demand is telling us consumers are utility maximizing. Here is the supply curve of a fixed number of firms. And then 3, we have the market clearing conditions, supply equal demand. So we've got 3 conditions determining that short-run equilibrium. Okay, long-run equilibrium, this is where things get a little more interesting, is that we now have a long enough period of time that firms can enter and exit. Why? How? What makes them do it? I think this is this is a simple solution, simple answer. I think the real solution is much more difficult. At some point in their life, people want to get out of a large organization and go it on their own. They hate working for a boss. They have a bright idea and they think they're ingenious, and they need to go to market for it. So there's all sorts of kind of personal reasons why companies form. Right? The reason we're going to give is because there's profit signals. Profitability is going to drive it. So firms, we're going to say firms enter the market when they see an expected profit. And this is a long-run profit. Okay? So should we get into business? Should we incorporate, get our friends together, ask them for money, have some of them work for us, try to go to market with this product? Well, the reason for doing that would be there's profit to be made. There's an expected profit. Okay? Now, the flip side of that is firms already in the business are not making a profit. And they don't have an expectation that if they stay in the business that they're going to do any better, that they're ever going to turn positive. Right? In that case, they make the decision to exit. All right. How do they form those expectations? Again, we're very fuzzy on that. Presumably, what the companies in the business right now are, how well they're doing, is a good signal. So you look at it and it says, "Oh man, I can do that," and they're making money hand over fist. I can do that, and I can do better. Right? If nothing else, I can imitate exactly what they're doing and make nearly as much profit as them. But I think I can even do better. Right? But so the signal was the profitability of established firms. Okay, so what happens if we get more and more firms? We're pushing out that market supply curve to the point where it's flat. And a picture says a lot. Oh, here's a little graph. Just so you know, I always find this amazing. But so the dark line here, this is from the Bureau of the Census. The dark line here is new firms forming. I guess with employees, because you can always have the shell corporation. You say, I create a corporation. It doesn't do anything. There's no employees, but I funnel money through it in the Cayman Islands and so forth. So those have been eliminated. The white line are going out of business. Bankruptcy or just shutting down. But bankruptcy is the usual one. But look at the number. These are annual numbers. So it goes from 1990 to 2000. There are over 600,000 firms that are formed every year. That's a lot of firms. Right? I mean, there's 300 million people. I always screw this. 300 million. Somebody do the calculator. 300 million people, 600,000 firms. How many people per firm every year? 300 million over 600,000. What is that? 500. Okay. So there's a firm formed for this class, right? Each year, not just forever, every single year. Right? But by the same token, 550,000, over 500,000 firms fail every year. So that's incredible flow in and out. The other thing is, it seems that at least over this period, the incoming exceeded the outgoing. So we're growing in terms of numbers. In terms of number, it was back here in the recession of 1990 that failures briefly exceeded firm formation. Okay, so when you replicate these firms as they come in, as I said, you start to get flatter and flatter and flatter long-run market supply curve taking off from that earlier slide, and where we have identical firms, and we just keep on adding more and more firms, and that curve gets flatter and flatter and flatter, and in the extreme, it's just perfectly flat. Right? Where is it? What level is it? Well, it's at the shutdown price. And the shutdown price is the bottom of the average cost curve. If we were in the longer run, and we are in a long period of time because we have entry and exit, that everything should be avoidable, so that we should be looking at the bottom of the long-run average cost curve, and each and every firm would be operating at what we call minimum efficient scale, right, where their average costs are minimum. Okay? So you get all of these firms adding to the supply, making it perfectly flat. Okay? All right, but there is this decision of whether or not to be in business. Now here's where something, there is kind of a disconnect here. Even if you have a long enough period of time in which firms can form and get into the business because they see a profit, so that price is at or above their minimum average cost, firms in the business may find it difficult to get out even if they're losing money. There's a couple of reasons. One we already saw is that they may have sunk costs, and so that they could actually not cover their total costs, and it would make perfectly good business sense to stay in the business. Right? So as long as they covered their variable costs, or what is avoidable, right? That is to say that the price was above the shutdown price, where the shutdown price is equal to the minimum of the average variable cost. But there may be even more reason to it, and that is the fact that you can actually have costs of going out of business. Right? You can have, certainly you have costs of getting into business. You got to get a business license, you get an office space, you got to pay fees, different things. Okay, but you can actually incur costs from leaving the business. Perhaps the best example, or worst example, really, in the U.S. is steel mills. The steel industry, if you go far enough back in time, were dominated by integrated mills in the U.S. Integrated mills are like cradle to grave. They mine the iron ore and the magnesium, and they have the blast furnaces where they make the pig iron, and then they stamp it, and then way out at the other end you get sheet metal. I don't know if this is steel, but that's a steel table, and for construction and cars and refrigerators, we use a lot of steel even today. A lot of them were located sort of cheek by jowl with the automobile industry because it was such a big user of steel. Engines, frames, bodies, and so forth. But anyways, that was the heyday. We have got our lunch eaten, and it showed up that the incumbent integrated steel mills, Bethlehem Steel, Ledham, U.S. Steel, which had 65% of the steel market at the turn of the century, at 1900. And all of them a few years ago, all 8 integrated large U.S. steel makers were in bankruptcy court. So what happened? Well, less efficient foreign steel makers was a good part of the story. There's other parts of the story, but they had lower labor costs, non-union workforces by and large. The plants were more modern. The record in the U.S. steel industry of adopting new techniques was just awful, abysmal. We were always behind Europe and Asia. Some new sources of iron ore, which is an essential ingredient, or use scrap. Some of the new electric furnaces that are used by mini mills which actually started in the U.S. as well as in Japan, found that they could produce steel very more cheaply using scrap. Right? So you recycled it. Okay, but they didn't go out of business, and part of it is big shutdown cost. It takes a lot to dismantle a mill. You know, just if one thing to consider, it takes something, I think, on the order of 3 to 4 weeks to cool down a blast furnace if you just want to stop it for a while. Suppose the price of steel just plummets because Russia gets their act together and starts producing a lot of steel. Well, it's not like you can just turn on and turn off these, not like a dial, but these things are heated up to thousands of degrees, and if you're not going to damage them, it takes weeks to cool them down, and then it takes not as long, but also weeks to get it heated back up. So there's significant adjustment cost. But what I'm thinking of here more is dismantling it and environmental cleanup. Can you imagine the stuff that is hanging around the steel mill plant and what the EPA would have them do? Plus, there could be, Aaron Brockovich there ready to have a class action suit. Cost of terminating union contracts. I saw yesterday that Chrysler is going to make an offer to, 30-some thousand employees, ranging up to $100,000 apiece to buy them, to pay them to not work. So they'll just buy them out. And what they're buying out is all of these benefits that were promised to them. Chrysler is going to give them six months of vision and health care as part of the package. So it can be very expensive to get out of the business because all of a sudden these kinds of expenses come due. For U.S. Steel, way back in '79, when the handwriting was on the wall, there was an estimate of the cost about $650 million just to shut down. That's grown to at least $1 billion since then. I think that's a gross underestimate. And as a result, they're pricing below average cost. Not only average total cost, but average variable cost. And how, that violates all of our rules of shutdown. They should be out of business. But not when you take into account the exit costs of getting out of this business. So the world prices of steel, on average since 1986, are way down $273 a ton for hot rolled sheets, and the average total cost and average variable cost for American steel mills exceeds that. Right? One explanation is the exit cost. All right, so in long-run equilibrium, assuming away those exit costs, we have our three conditions. I just put up condition 0 here just to remind us that we had consumer optimization as well, so that we got them maximizing their utility subject to the budget constraint. But what we want to bring in is these three, 1, 2, 3, profit maximization, price equal to marginal cost, and now free entry and exit. Free entry and exit comes about because if there's a profit, someone will come in. Okay? When is there a profit? Well, there's a profit when price exceeds the average cost. Okay? So they'll come in, they'll push out supply. If price is below average cost, in other words, that they're losing money, some will leave the market and take their supply with them. Okay? Ultimately, price has got to equal average cost, or there's got to be break-even, zero profit for everybody in a long-run equilibrium. Okay? And then finally, market clearing, supply is equal to demand. So we have basically 3 equations and 3 unknowns. And we know that in that case we can find a solution. The three unknowns are price, the market price, the quantity per firm, and then the number of firms. Again, this is a case where everyone's identical and they're profit maximizing. Here's an example, just walking through exactly that. Demand and cost conditions, we have a cubic total cost curve, which is going to give us a quadratic marginal cost curve. And we have a linear demand. Okay? So, believe it or not, that's all we really need to solve for a long-run competitive equilibrium. Then we have our three conditions. Price equal to marginal cost. So I said price equal to marginal cost after I found the marginal cost. Break even, zero profit, so price equal to average cost. I said price equal to average cost. So that's just total cost divided by quantity. It's a little bit different from marginal cost. And then demand equals supply. Demand's on the left-hand side. Supply is just n, the number of firms, times the production of each individual firm. So we can play around with this, in particular using the fact that marginal cost has got to equal to average cost, because we're right at the bottom of that unit cost curve. That helps us pin down quantity. Turns out quantity here is 50. When we plug that quantity and that price back in, we get a demand of 10,000 units, and then we can simply find how many firms will produce those 10,000 units if each and every one of them is producing at minimum efficient scale. That's what's so helpful here, is we know what an individual firm looks like. It's being efficient, so it's pricing at the bottom of its average cost curve. That's where marginal and average costs are equal. So we got the size of each firm, so we just ask how many of these firms do we need to meet the demand at that market price? Well, the demand is 10,000. We know each one, the minimum efficient scale is 50. That tells us we need 200 of these firms to do the job. All right, so that solves this in a particular case. Again, the thing is, we just started with a cost condition of our representative firm, market demand, and then we used our three conditions: price equal to marginal cost for profit maximization, price equal to average cost for zero profit due to free entry and exit, and then market clearing, supply equals to demand, and bingo, we got it. Well, bingo, it's it's a little bit, you got to do a little manipulation to get out the solution. Okay, let's take a break, a 2-minute break, come back at 9 o'clock, because I really want to get to auctions. While we're waiting for everybody else to come back in, I just wanted to show you, this is one of the Excelettes that's provided with the textbook that's up on the B-Space. This is the one to illustrate short-run market equilibrium. And so on the left-hand panel here, we have just the firm supply. What we have is kind of the orange colors are marginal cost curve. It's cutting the average total cost curve, kind of this fuchsia-colored U-shaped curve at its bottom. The purple is our average variable cost. Notice it starts at 0, so it's saying the shutdown price for this firm in the short run is 0. Okay, so then for that case, translated over in the right-hand panel is again purple is the market supply curve in the short run. Okay, this is doubly short run. It's short run because we're assuming the firm is in the short run, so some factors are fixed and they are also sunk. It's also the short run because there's a fixed number of firms. Now I put this up because the nice thing about this is you can change the number of firms here, and oops. And so as you do, oh, I'm at a maximum. All right, let's go back. So let's start here with 200 firms, which was the solution to the problem I had up there. Now, what's going to happen is we're going to increase the number of firms. Now, one thing we note that at this demand and this supply, gets a price of 30. That 30 is above both the average variable cost and the average total cost. In other words, they're making money. They're making money long run or short run, whether they're sunk or not sunk. Okay? Now, what that would do is that would tend to attract more firms saying, hey, I can replicate exactly what these guys are doing in the industry, so I can make their profit as well. Somewhere down below here, it probably computes the profit, shows how much it is. But what will happen is then you'll start seeing more and more firms enter. As they enter, they push out that market supply curve. Right? I'm up to 270, 282, 286. Now I'm up to 300 firms. I've pushed that out. But what I've done also is I've lowered the market price, and I'm getting closer now to break even for the representative firm. So if I keep on going out, coming down, 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 down to 400, well, this stops at 400, and they're still making money at $21.40 for whatever that is. But if I kept on going, eventually they would just break even. Okay? One way of doing that, I guess, is to change the fixed cost. As I raise the fixed cost, now they're losing money, right? Because I'm raising the fixed cost, driving up the average total cost, and the market price is falling below average cost. All right, well, check it out. And let's go back to this. All right, one last thing before we move on to auctions is that we saw increasing and decreasing average cost firms for a lot of reasons. The returns to scale. There was also learning by doing that gave you an experience curve, which was a question on the midterm. Right? So as firms scale up in some way or another, we can see the unit costs go up or go down. Right? This is about what happens to the cost of an industry as it scales up or scales down as there is entry or exit. Okay? It's not individual firms scaling up, but it's the industry scaling up by entry and exit. Okay, so you see the difference? Okay, well, one of the things that can happen is that as more firms enter the industry, they are less efficient compared to the ones that are already in it. And this stands to reason that the ones that are most efficient at producing something, they have the least cost, see the greatest profit, and they're the first ones in. The other explanation is that they have lower costs because they were in and they had learning by doing and lower costs as a result of that learning. Okay? But the point is that the new firms that come in could have a higher cost. Think of agriculture, and this really goes back to the original observation of David Ricardo, is that as population grows, demand for grains, corn, vegetables, and so forth go up, we need more and more arable land, so you start recovering land that's more marginal. That's kind of rocky. It's not particularly good soil condition, a lot of acid in the soil. The weather conditions aren't, growing season is kind of short, and so forth. But there's such a demand for it, you bring it into cultivation. So you got to do more, rock removal, more hoeing, more irrigation, and so forth. So you can see the costs are going up as you bring this less fertile land into production. Okay? But that is the natural response to a growing market. Okay. And then this actually leads into the other thing that's happening. As the market grows, it puts pressure on the supply of inputs. So for instance, if you have more and more steel makers come in, there's just so many deposits of iron ore and manganese in the world that in order to feed this production. So again, you're looking at more marginal sites that require a higher cost to get it out of the ground. Okay. Well, one of the things is that there's really an externality. We'll talk about those later in the course, but it's a pecuniary externalities. Somebody comes in the market, and by being there and producing, they can raise the cost of somebody already in the market. Think of it as a small town. And just yesterday, Toyota announced that they're going to open a huge plant in Tupelo, Tennessee. I think that's the home of Elvis Presley, or was, unless he's still alive. I don't know. You can imagine what's going to happen to the labor market in that place. And of course, they're going to bring people in from all over the place, but all of a sudden, the cost of doing business is going to be high. Now, it's not going to be the only plant in town. It's not raising the cost of other automakers, but it could steal from auto parts makers in the region and so forth. So you can see how entry can cause the factor prices to go up, and that's another source for how costs can go up. All right. There may also be entry restrictions. The government is very good at putting limits on entry, and so the subsequent entrants can face higher costs of being in business. Here's just what it looks like for the case of cotton, where entire countries are used here. So you can see that as the cotton production here measured in billions of kilograms per year, as it goes up, we are not a particularly good or efficient producer, and so we have higher costs, and therefore we're at that end of it, whereas Pakistan, Argentina, and other places are much cheaper. But again, as you bring into production less efficient sources of the good, higher costs, you cause an industry or market supply curve to go up. And it doesn't flatten out as we're used to seeing. So we get this rising that takes place as a result of scaling up. Here we're going from firm 1 to firm 2, and we're bringing in a firm that's more inefficient, higher cost. The reverse could happen as well, and this could happen as someone comes into the market and they realize, suppose they need a part, a microprocessor, a digital signal processor for a new whatever, for the iPhone. Okay? These aren't currently made, and yet they experience high increasing returns to scale. By increasing the total industry purchase of this input, the input industry scales up, realizes their returns to scale, takes the form of lower unit costs, which are passed along to this downstream firm, and it causes the industry cost to fall and the supply curve to fall as well. So this is actually a case of a falling supply curve. Now, this isn't a violation of what we usually think of law of, there is no law of demand, but we always think demand, supply slopes up, right? Higher priced and more delivered to the market. Well, that certainly can be true of an individual firm, but there's more going on here. There's entry and exit that's causing this. Okay, and here's some estimates. Different industries, some slope up, some slope down, some are pretty flat, but on average there's a slight upward slope. All right, let's talk about auctions. Again, it's another mechanism to set price and determine transactions. Right? We talked about the Walrasian auction as if I was up here and setting a price, eliciting your willingness to supply and your willingness to demand, and I followed some kind of auction rule that its goal was to bring the quantity supplied and the quantity demand into equality. Right? Now, more common is the kind of Sotheby's type auction, in which there's an object, there's some art object here that's put on the stand, and you get some information before it. You all were given a paddle. That paddle has a number on it, and I open up the bidding. There's an opening bid, of $100,000 for this rare artifact, and then you raise your paddle when you want to bid, okay? If you like 100,000, you raise your paddle, and I say, okay, it's to number 283, and then we raise the bids and see until we can stop, okay? And we're going to talk about it. That's basically what's called an English auction. There's also procurement, which is sort of a reverse. The usual auction, there's one seller and many buyers. In procurement, it's more one buyer who's looking for a seller from among many sellers. And so defense contracts, construction contracts, the vending machines here on campus, they're all done through procurement contracts. So you submit bids saying, okay, I will do it. I will build your building. I will make your jet fighter. And here's what I'm going to charge you for it. So it reverses the buyer and the seller. We're going to be talking mainly about auctions. A lot of auctions going out. Federal Reserve has weekly sale of Treasury bills and notes. That's done by auction. The FCC got something on the order of $10 billion for the U.S. Treasury by selling the airwaves in which my phone and most of your phones run on. That money was auctioned off to Verizon Wireless, T-Mobile, Singular, and so forth. Okay? Sale of stolen, repossessed property. Private sellers, I talk about Sotheby's, perhaps the best example in the new economy is eBay and its online auctions. Others are like Priceline, which actually has a patent on a reverse auction. If you've ever used Priceline, it's reverse. It's not like they say, okay, here's a rental car in Chicago for 1 week. What am I bid? No, what happens is you go in and say, I want a rental car in Chicago for 1 week, and I make a bid, and then the suppliers, the sellers, rental car companies, respond saying, okay, I'll accept your bid or not. So it's considered a reverse auction. And then Google, it auctions some parts of its ads on the banner when you do a search. They also auctioned off their stock when they went to an IPO. And we'll talk about what they do. eBay, how many have bought or sold on eBay here? Okay, so about a third, quarter. All right, so you know it's a timed format. You have so many days in which to bid. The bids are ascending, a lot like the art auction that I talked about. The other thing is the seller has a reserve bid. So when I put this up for sale, bidding started at $100,000. That is the minimum bid. All right. If we don't get anybody raising their paddle at that time, we take this off and go home. All right. The same thing goes on with the auctions on eBay, is that seller has a reserve price, and they just tell you, we have not yet met the reserve price. All right. If the reserve price is not met, there's no sale. Okay. Information is critical in all of this. You know the bidding history. You can look up the seller reputation can matter, the feedback rating or whether they're ID verified. Other things going on here is buy it now option. They were actually, eBay was sued but won. Somebody said they had a patent on the buy it now option. You can also create proxy bidding agents who will do your work for you in eBay. One of the things that happens, for those of you who have played, bought or sold on eBay, is you know that all the action is in the last hour or so. So here is the cumulative, this is the last hour on eBay for selling computers or antiques, and also on Amazon for selling computers and antiques. And this is minutes left. So this is the last hour in the average transaction. What happens is it ramps up. People sit there by their computer waiting to see if somebody else was going first, and presumably they have in mind what they want to pay for it, and but they don't want to, they don't want to pay for it if they don't have to. Okay. Google AdWords Select, you pay for the right-hand side panel, but there's also other things, and they on the search response results, and these are click-through prices, by the way. It's only what you pay if somebody actually clicks through to them. They're not like in the case of the Nielsen ratings, where what they're looking for is impressions. So if you're staring at the TV asleep, as some people are here, you get counted anyways, right? And but that's not true with Google. You have to click through to before that you get charged. All right. So some auction formats. The rules differ. How you submit a bid, open cry or sealed bid. If I'm auctioning this object, I'm looking for somebody to say in public what they'll pay for it. Now, these are very sophisticated for art auctions, and you just have this little paddle that you raise, and you never raise your voice. But if we were auctioning off, I don't know, hog bellies or something like that, you'd be yelling out your bids. All right, that's why it's called open cry. But they could also be sealed. All right, so I can say, all right, put it in an envelope, pass it in. I'll open up all the envelopes, and I'll find out what the highest bidder is. Now, the winner pay. What does the winner pay? Well, it almost always goes to the highest bidder. There's some exceptions, but and there's first price and second price. First price is the one is I'm auctioning this off. It goes up to 1.1 million. Who takes it? And number 383 has the last bid at 1.1 million. Going once, going twice, going 3 times. Sold to 383. Right now, they had the highest bid and they paid the bid that they made. There are other auctions where you don't pay your bid. Okay? So one way is I open up all these envelopes, if you give a sealed bid, and I look at it and I say, okay, number 383 was the highest bidder, 1.1 million, but I'm not going to make them pay that. What's the next highest bid? Well, it was only $1 million. I'm going to make them pay that $1 million. All right? So keep that in mind. It's kind of strange, right? That why you wouldn't have you pay the bid that you made. Well, it turns out there's some interesting economics behind it. Okay. The other thing that's important is valuation, is whether it's private values or common values. If I took out a $20 here, and I had no reason, to get a counterfeit, this is a real $20 bill, and I put this up here and I said, all right, let's have an auction, an English auction. Will anybody give me a dime for this? Yes. Okay. Do I hear a quarter? Anybody give me 25 cents? Okay. So we just could keep on going. And part of the thing that's happening here is this is a $20 bill. You trust me, and it's a $20 bill, and it's what it's worth. Okay? And it's worth $20 to everybody here. But this art object, you may love that period of French art, and you may hate it, or maybe indifferent. So you have private values. So that's the case of private values. Common values is the $20 bill that everybody agrees what it's worth. Right? So that'll be critical. Right? We already talked open. So open cry auctions was the ones I could. I started it for this $20 bill at a dime, then a quarter, and we could go on up. That's an English auction, and eventually it would go. Now, presumably, I'd get up close to 20 bucks, and then it would drop off because it's not worth your trouble even walking up here to pick it up because there's nothing much to be made. There's also a Dutch auction, and that's the one that Google used for their IPO. And it's bizarre. It was called Dutch because it was first used to sell tulips in Holland, and it goes in reverse. So I have this $20 bill, or whatever the object is, and I start up at 40. And I say, are there any takers? 35, 30, 25, 24. And I keep on coming down. And the first one to raise their hand gets the object. Okay? So it's a top-down. It's a descending price auction. And so you can see when you're selling stock, they say, okay, Google at $400 a share. Nobody even expected it to be at eventually $500, but it sold at 85, something like that. And then they would go down and they'd sell shares as the price would come down. Okay? Sort of sweeping out the demand curve, really, making sales to the highest willingness to pay. Anyways, so those are open cry and their sealed bid. Let's look, though, at bid shading. Because one of the things that happens, if I'm selling this art object and bidder 383 wants to buy this thinks it's worth $2 million to them for whatever reason, then when they go up, eventually everybody else drops off because they don't value it. So we go up to 1.1 million, all right? And that's the most that the next highest willingness to pay is. Why go up any higher? So in an English auction, you stop at the second highest bidder's maximum willingness to pay. You don't want to bid against yourself. If you're the highest bidder at 1.1 million and nobody else is raising their paddle, why would you go up to 1.2 million? You just cost yourself $100,000, right? So you stop at that point. So you don't pay your full willingness to pay. Right? It's crazy. Right? So in a sense, that's bid shading, but it's the outcome and structure of an English auction. So let's look at a very simple case. This is going to be a first price sealed bid auction. So it's not English. You're going to put it in an envelope, submit it up here. I'm going to open up the envelopes. Whoever has the highest bid will get the object, and they'll pay what they wrote down on the slip of paper and put in the envelope. Okay? They value it at V1. They'll make a bid at B1. And there's a bunch of different bidders like you in this room. Let's use a little expected utility theory here. Very little. The expected utility of this one of these bidders is simply the product that they would, of the probability that they would get the object, they'd win the bid. So when I open up they had the highest bid, times the difference between their value and what they had to pay. Okay? So if you think this $20 bill is worth $20 and you put in a bid of 19, you come away with $1. But your expectation of getting that $1 depends on what everybody else bids. And that's captured right here by the probability that a bid of 19 will actually win you the auction, that you will be the highest bidder. Okay? So let's look at it. What will you submit bid? What's the optimal bid? Well, you want to maximize your expected utility. There's your expected utility. It's a function of your bid and your value. Let's maximize that. So what do? Well, we differentiate it with respect to the bid, and we set that equal to 0. In other words, we find where our marginal expected utility from the last dollar of bidding is equal to 0, because then we got to the top of this hill. All right? Well, you can find out that the optimum, and I should put a little star on there, is less than your value. So you will engage in bid shading. All right? You will never go over, I hope. Although when I do this, somebody says, "Oh, $21," right? They got the notoriety. They're 15 seconds of notoriety that they won the auction here, and it cost them $1. But it doesn't make any sense in real business to pay above the value of something, right? So we can exclude that, but what we can't exclude is bid shading. Here's what happens. Here I've got the bids, and on the horizontal axis, up to a maximum of the value of the object, V1. Anything beyond that is crazy, right? Okay, so the expected utility is the product of two things. First of all, your surplus, okay? What the thing's worth minus what you actually paid for it if you win the bid, right? And the more you bid, the less your surplus is. If you bid 0 but get it, you get the full value and you paid 0. At the other extreme, you paid exactly what it was worth to you and you got it, but there's nothing left over. Then there's a probability of getting the bid. Expected utility is the product of those two, and when you get this product, you get this blue hump-shaped curve. It looks like kind of like a profit hill or a utility hill. Whatever it is, we've seen this before, and you want to get to the top. Well, because it's the product, and because one of the two, either the surplus or the probability, is equal to 0 at these two extremes, 0 and V1, that hill has to come down to that point. So it really does take this shape here, this blue curve, so it peaks somewhere in between, therefore shading goes on. Okay, so you would never, even in a sealed bid auction, put your full price, your full value. Now, what happens, and I'll just go through this real quickly, is there's a way of getting around that, and it's due to William Vickery, who won the Nobel about 10 years ago, and then tragically died 2 weeks later in a car crash. It was pretty sad. And he's come up with a lot of different mechanisms, like some of the pricing schemes that are used on the streets of Singapore to reduce congestion. But he also came up with what is called a Vickery auction, which is a little bit like some of the proxy bidding agents in eBay and also Google's some Google scheme. what it comes down to is it's the second price auction. The second price, you pay the second price, highest price, not the price you submit. So if we now look at that expected payoff here, it's the product of our surplus and the probability of winning the object, but the surplus is the value of it minus what the other guy bid. Okay? So your bid has no effect on your surplus. It only has effect on the probability of getting the object. And consequently, you will bid exactly what it is worth to you, because that gives you the right probability. If you have a higher value than the other guy, then you get the object, and you get the maximum chance of getting the object is by bidding your value. If it's less, in which case the other guy was going to outbid you, and you're going to pay more than it's worth to you, you want to minimize the probability. So you still set your bid equal to your value. So it ends up in truth-telling. Why? Your payment for winning the object, the winner's payment, is not its value. All right? So in a sense, it decouples your valuation from your payment. So it elicits the truth. You're willing to tell the truth because what you pay for it is what somebody else bids on it. Remember, the bid shading that happened, the other one is because you actually pay what you slipped into that envelope. Okay? Vickery's auction decoupled that. Okay, sorry for keeping you longer.